Hey everybody, it is Alexandra Hoerr. We're back again, and I'm really excited about today's interview. Alex Parlette is a therapist also at Optimum Joy Clinical Counseling. I know we've had some people who are on staff at Optimum Joy, and then some people who are just other therapists or, well, yeah, I guess it has been all therapists, but just like thoughtful people in like a segment of an industry or a topic and stuff like that. And today, I feel like could be a little bit of like a hot topic or taboo topic in a way. And the reason I say that is because Alex, who we call ACP in the office because I was the original Alex, ACP really works a lot with relationship related issues, whether that's couples or, you know, people figuring out their sexuality in the context of a relationship, conflict in relationship, just a lot of whether it's individual or couple related. I would say that you get to do a lot of relationship work with people. And one of the things here, I've held people in suspense. One of the things is that you work with people around maybe porn, but specifically porn misuse or using porn as like a stress reducer instead of maybe something that would be a healthier coping mechanism. So
Yeah.
will maybe ACP, if you'll define maybe kind of what we're talking about today as it relates to like the negative parts of porn, because I know that there's a wide variety of what people view about porn. So
Sure. Yeah. I work, a lot of the clients that I work with where pornography use or pornography addiction comes up is when the clients might be misusing pornography in a way to relieve like their overall stress, use it as a coping mechanism where, we might call that a maladaptive coping behavior, right? It is a way to cope with stress because you can get kind of an immediate satisfaction, but in the long run, that immediate satisfaction actually diminishes, right? And you're not actually even dealing with the stress. You're not working through the stress, and so it's not a healthy coping behavior.
yeah, well, I even like that word maladaptive. It's something that we clinicians use all the time. When we think of like adaptive coping, it's like helpful or healthy coping. And mal means like bad or unhealthy in a way. I hesitate to say good or bad, but like
Yeah,
bad coping, like
yeah,
bad adaptive coping. But the fact that it's bad adaptive is essentially like it is working for you in some way, but it gets to a point in time where it's actually more harmful or more unhealthy or not working more for you than it is actually helping. And porn is
yeah.
really something that can cross that line pretty easily.
Yeah, for sure. One way I like to describe it to clients, like maladaptive coping behavior, is like a non-life-giving coping mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Where you're not like adding to your life in healthy ways.
Yeah. And that sense of vitality, like liveliness. I'm curious, Alex, like how did you even come to like treat, and if it's okay, can I just call it porn misuse? Or is
Yeah,
that a better term? How did you come to treat porn misuse or even like get interested in this type of work with people?
yeah. So when I first started getting into the field, I think um, a lot of clients who were being assigned to me, or people who were asking for me, were emerging adult males in college or just out of college because they were looking for a male therapist. And as we would kind of get it into the therapy process and um, just looking at some of their different life stressors, pornography use just kept coming up. It's really a pervasive issue in in our culture, and so that kind of just started me down this path of looking more into research on pornography use, the um, benefits, if you want to call it that, and the harms. And um, so it kind of just landed in my lap per se. It's not something that coming out of my master's program I was like, man, I'm going to work with men and women who are misusing pornography. Um, but I've come to really enjoy the research and enjoy the process of working with different clients
Yeah.
on this topic. And I think people would be surprised how frequent and often porn is being used.
Oh,
So,
yeah. And I think too, I don't know if you have any thoughts about this because, just hearing you say the main demographic you work with is probably young, emerging adult males is kind of what I heard you say. But I think that it is also something like I historically have worked with a lot of women, and pornography and like masturbation, I think do actually exist also in a female population. It's just a little bit more
yeah.
taboo or it's different. And I don't know if you have any kind of thoughts around just like gender differences between men
Yeah.
and women and how that shows up, you know, obviously in their therapeutic work, but just life in general.
Yeah. So, research is definitely a little behind when it comes to pornography use in the women and the female population.
Hmm.
Um, Unfortunately, probably with a lot of different areas being similar there, right?
Yeah.
But current research, it is showing that women are using pornography
Hmm.
at the same rate, if not maybe even a little more than
Interesting.
some men. But it's not necessarily concrete yet, whereas some of the research done on pornography with male use is not necessarily concrete, but a little bit more backed because of the amount of research in that area.
Hmm.
Uh, and so definitely something that I'm continuing to learn more in and wanting to learn more in as
Yeah.
well.
I would say, especially as like research comes out, the more you learn, or the more, for me, for me, it's very often that when someone sits in front of me as
Mhm.
like a person who wants to create change in our life, that then sometimes myself as like a clinician, I'm like, oh, now I know what I need to grow in as it
Yeah,
relates to you. I think a lot of my career, even like what you said, is a lot of your career development, and I would say the same for me too, has almost been I have done what I needed to do based on the people in front of me. And they just
yeah,
so happen to be emerging adult men with porn misuse
yeah,
or addiction. Yeah. It's interesting because I think that one thing I've noticed with women, if I could say this forward and then ask a question, the thing I've noticed with women is it almost feels like something they confess in a way, like, oh yeah, I watch porn, and there's kind of a shame component around it.
yeah,
And I'm just like thinking out loud that maybe that would be different for men because it's kind of an accepted, men are more, I don't agree with this, but men are more sexual than women. They're more visual than women, all that different stuff. But how does shame, is it the same or different in men?
I find it depends on the client, but a lot of the clients especially male clients that I've worked with, there's a lot of shame and guilt there, and that might be because of the Christian population and that Christian uh,
Yeah.
like religion backdrop with a client. But especially within the Christian male demographic, when it comes to pornography use,
Mhm.
huge amounts of shame and guilt. So a part of the therapy process of working through the pornography is working through the shame and the guilt that's associated with the pornography use, and honestly just with their sexual identity as being a male,
Yeah.
um, whether they're dating, not dating, married, you know all of the above.
And how do you think, when I hear kind of like the Christian influence, I think a lot historically around like pretty intense purity culture.
Hmm.
Can you maybe say if based like on your in what you think the purity culture was and how that maybe has produced shame feelings around sexuality in Christianity? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's that a lot of the things that came out of that purity culture was secrecy, right? And so
Yeah.
when especially when it comes to sexuality within the church, and so um, especially for men, right, who Christian men in particular with this demographic who are looking for answers when it comes to their sexuality and wanting to explore their sexuality, right? Um, they're not having those conversations within the church. Um, because just in general, those conversations aren't happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and for that same reason, a lot of parents might not necessarily be having those same conversations as well, because they might not know how to have them. And so with modern technology, right, it's just the easiest way to kind of explore that for teenage
Right, right, right.
or young adult men is to go to the internet. And so many common stories, right? So part of like the therapy within pornography use is hearing the story of how it started, right? How young it started. And a lot of those stories, it starts with just Googling or looking up, random phrases on the internet of wanting to learn.
Yep.
And then after a week, a month, maybe even faster, stumbling upon pornography, videos, usually pictures first and then videos, right? And just hearing that same storyline. And this is all in secret, right? They're doing this behind closed doors. They're doing this on their own.
Or just right here in their phones.
Right. Yeah. Especially now, right? With smartphones and
Mhm.
that easy access to the internet. And
Mhm.
so because it is that kind of behind closed doors, it creates, and I think purity culture has created this secrecy and like quietness and taboo around sexuality. And so when boys in particular, with the research and with the clients I've worked with,
Yeah.
start getting involved in that, right? They automatically feel shame and guilt because who can they turn to talk to about this?
Right.
Uh,
Right. Yeah. That's the idea of secrecy is really resonating with me. And I think even too, you know, um, just the idea of taking a sexual history. How did
mhm.
you develop as a person in your sexuality over time? Because I would say that we are all part of being human is to also a component of that is to be like a sexual being, and how people express that or manifest that, engage in that probably looks pretty different. Um, but I even was thinking back, like in my very young, like middle school, I went to a large middle school, and part of like my historical development was people would say things that I didn't understand. And in that moment, I think as a really sheltered, intense, like purity culture person, I just didn't know a lot of what someone would say something and I'd be like, I don't know what that means. But I would just be like, oh yeah, haha, like ha 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 in my like little middle school group. And then for sure went and Googled whatever that
Yeah,
was in a way kind of like for me my sexual education. I
mhm.
wasn't getting it from I just didn't, no fault to my parents, I didn't get it from my parents, I didn't
Sure.
get it from the church world. And so instead, when some of these things started to come up, I think I specifically sought out my sexual education through the internet because it wasn't being engaged in a different way, which it absolutely was a very secretive and eventually like shameful thing,
Yeah.
so I can see how going back to even just where was your early development as
Mhm.
being really important.
Yeah.
Do you find that people think about their like sexual development very often? Like, is that a common thing that people think about?
Um, I don't think so. That hasn't been my experience with the clients that I've worked with. And
Hmm.
again, I think probably just because of maybe the awkwardness of that conversation, or um, again, maybe the purity culture, maybe the secrecy behind it, the fact that it's not talked about, right? And um, really anywhere, right? Um, I don't think people normally think about those things.
Right. It's hard for me sometimes because I think you and I being trained as therapists, we think about everything developmentally. So sometimes like the way I think about my life, I'm like, is that how people think about their life? No, probably not, but it's because we've been trained in a certain way. Because I
Yeah.
even just like in our work,
Mhm.
anybody can come in with anxiety, like anything, and probably one of the first questions we'll ask is, now, when did you notice this first, or like when's the first time it happened, or blah blah blah, like push it all the way back in history. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's really helpful. And what kind of like, you know in the time that you've been practicing, and I know before you were a therapist you actually worked still with like a young adolescent or developing male population, kind of
Mhm.
in the context of a church actually, but like
Yeah.
over time, what are some like trends that you've noticed in regards to pornography, sexual development, porn misuse, kind of the whole gamut of things?
Yeah. I mean, so some of the things, first off, I think to be able to start that answer, adding in some of the research that I've done and like looking into it, what's hard is, so we were just talking about how like as teenagers, even before teenagers now, right, with access, boys are starting to find pornography earlier, right, and
Right.
starting to watch it earlier. And what research is showing there is it's interesting, whereas earlier when you are a teenager, they these boys still have the autonomy to be able to like, yeah, I want to watch or I don't want to watch. They can go weeks, even months, and be totally okay, and it's not a huge deal. But then as they develop and as they go through those teenage years of developmental stages,
Mhm.
now you're in your early 20s, you actually lose that autonomy, and it's just a reaction. And almost that's where that addictive piece can come into play now, is where they actually kind of need that to deal with stress, to deal with life and things like that. And them losing that autonomy is huge. And so when I start working with clients who are in their mid to late 20s, right, um, it's that's a huge part of their story, right? Is when I first started, it was like, yeah, every now and then 18, 19, 20. Now it's 2 to 3, 4, 5 times a week, 2 to 3 times a day, right? Just depends on the person and the story.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to realize what that research is kind of telling us and showing us right now, as they look at the same men in these research over years of timelines, right? And continuing to check up on them and check in with them.
Yeah, and so when you're saying autonomy, are you essentially saying almost like a loss of a sense of like choice in the matter, more than just like I'm compelled to do this? Like, is that what you mean, or break that down for me a little bit?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Almost like that choice, right? So like, kind of like with that addictive nature when it comes to drugs and alcohol, right? You
Right.
talk to a lot of people who are addicted to drugs or alcohol, and they'll say, "I want to stop," right? But it's like they lose that autonomy, that choice to actually be able to stop, right? It's what research is showing us with pornography is that it's that same type of reaction as they get through those developmental years of teenager into emerging adult, mid to
Mhm.
late 20s.
It's interesting because technically, like a porn addiction, porn misuse is probably like a more gentle term, that
Yeah.
we're using today. But like, um, it really actually falls under the category when we think clinically about it as impulse control, right?
Mm. Yeah.
So, and alcoholism, gambling, what else? Like a shopping addiction,
Mhm.
some of these things where it's almost kind of like,
More process addictions.
yes, exactly. And it's kind of like the part of our brain that makes choices. Like I can choose, even take shopping. I can choose to buy this in this moment, or I can choose not to buy it. It's
Mhm.
almost just kind of like the high of purchasing something new, the high of the drink, that an alcoholic would take, or for someone with porn, it's like the high of
Mhm.
like, essentially, I would assume like probably an orgasm or whatever, or even I think it can be different for different people with porn misuse, but that actually is a dopamine path in our brains that continues to gets stronger the more we do it, and the need for more also increases. So I think that that's what's hard with impulse control stuff, is it's essentially like your need for it becomes more and more and more, and you can't
Yeah.
really choose to not do it because
Yeah.
you hardwired your brain to need it.
Well, and with pornography in particular, what research has found is, so the love chemical, right, that humans make, oxytocin, when people first start using when people first start using pornography, specifically men, oxytocin is released when they masturbate while watching pornography. And
Mm-hmm.
then over time, oxytocin actually isn't released anymore,
Ooh, that's
right? And so that, in essence, is the track of it becoming addictive, right? So you first use pornography and get that oxytocin to feel the high, but after using pornography for enough and for long enough, right, your body actually doesn't release that anymore.
mm-hmm.
And the only way that we have found, that research has found, to retrain your body to release that is to completely cut out the pornography and completely almost cut out sex in general for, I mean, depending on the research, right, a specific amount of time, and then reintroduce healthy sexual activities with another human being,
A
and not,
real live human being.
right, and not just a computer screen,
Yeah.
right? And then and that's like a reset for the brain when it comes to releasing the oxytocin.
Yeah.
And a lot of researchers are also equating that to why we're seeing sexual dysfunction within men in their mid 20s and early 30s who have used pornography for so long, is that a part of that dysfunction is their body just isn't creating the oxytocin when they're actually having sex
Right.
with a person instead of just watching pornography.
Which is important because I don't know if everybody would know this who's listening, but oxytocin is essentially the bonding chemical. It's
Mm-hmm.
what makes you feel connected emotionally, and you know, oxytocin actually works differently in men and women. I don't know the research well enough to quote it at this point in time, but for men, it makes them feel more kind of committed to their sexual partner.
Mm.
Um, when it's released. And it's interesting. So would you say that that essentially what you just described is withdrawal? Like that
Yeah.
you withdraw and reset?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which
Mm-hmm.
is which is interesting too. I think sometimes how maybe a sexual addiction and a porn addiction is different than maybe alcoholism. Is alcoholics and AA kind of say, um, you're a drunk, or you're an alcoholic forever, so you shouldn't take another drink ever again. But what's
Mm-hmm.
interesting about hearing you say this is there's a reintroduction.
To healthy sexual activities, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I guess that's an important thing to say. More healthy. Yeah.
Not a reintroduction to pornography again, right? But a reintroduction to healthy sexual activities. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, because I would imagine being sexuality is different than a substance, just utilizing a substance.
Mhm.
Um, because essentially, if we look at attachment, we're designed, any mammal, which is a human being, is designed for relationships and
Right.
attached. Yeah. So, well, this makes me ask, because we're talking about oxytocin and like bonding, who all, in your opinion, is impacted by a porn addiction?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, it's not just the individual engaging in pornography, right? Couples, whether you're married or not, huge impact on the other person.
Yeah.
Um, Again, a lot of research that has gone into that shows that the divorce rate in marriages where one person is using pornography is almost twice as high as other marriages where pornography is not being used by either of the people. Um, and so it's having a huge impact on families, family dynamic. Uh, yeah, it's not just the individual using.
Yeah. So it's definitely the partner. And you know, this is interesting. I was just reading a study a couple of weeks ago that when men kind of objectify, this study was focusing on men objectifying women. I don't know exactly, it could probably translate to so many other things, but
Yeah.
and specifically if we were to think about like viewing porn, that different parts of their brain actually light up, and what actually lights up is tool use. The like tool, like a hammer, like the same part of your brain that would light up if you're like hammering a nail into the wall, like I'm using this object to get something done,
Yeah.
is the part of the brain that lights up when you're watching porn, um, which actually, like, I would say more broadly objectifies women and impacts not just the man or woman, let me correct myself, who has a porn addiction, and not just the person who's like in a sexual relationship with them, but it actually has a societal impact where
Yeah.
men are, or women, I always think about, maybe that's like something I'm realizing I need to kind of correct that in my mind, is I think
Yeah.
about porn addiction mostly as a male problem. And
Yeah.
I need to maybe correct some of that. I'm
Yeah.
realizing.
Yeah. I think,
But that study was only on men and their objectification of
yeah.
women. So I'm okay. Okay. I'm okay. Phew. Okay.
The specific study that you're referencing there. Yeah.
But I do think I'm going to have to, it's challenging me to maybe go do some research on what porn addiction, sexual addiction looks like in women. Because I know it exists clinically and, just like relationships I've had personally with people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, it's interesting, even within our field too, of like the stance on pornography use and how it's changed throughout time, right? So back in the early, this isn't even that long ago, right? But like in the early 2000s, a lot of marriage and family couples or therapists, right? And therapists working with couples specifically with like on sexual dysfunction and things like that within their relationship, they would actually give out homework assignments to watch pornography, right? To possibly learn more and engage with each other in a conversation around what they just watched. You're not really seeing that as much anymore. But so like even within our field, right, seeing that difference based on research that has been done and has come out over the past 10, 15 years, and just seeing that change within this field too.
Right. Which makes me ask the question, Alex, because we live, you know, on the back end of like the sexual revolution,
Mm-hmm.
as a time in history, we live in a very sexually fluid time,
Yeah.
uh, and where people essentially have the opportunity to be the most free sexually than they ever have been in history.
Mm-hmm.
But to notice that maybe our field is trending towards um, not as free. And so that's just something I'm noticing. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah. I think I would agree with that trend because I think as therapists, right, we're wanting to look at what is like healthy for our clients, right? And um, sexuality is such an important part of our being, right? And like who we are as a human. And just engaging someone in that conversation of what does a healthy sexuality look like for you,
Mhm.
right? And helping them find out what that means for themselves, and going down that path.
Yeah.
I think it's a big part of what we do.
Yeah. Oh, I think so. I hear you basically saying helping people define that
Hmm.
in their own lives can look very different. And specifically, maybe as it relates to porn addiction, in that withdrawal period to reintroduce more healthy sexuality, it is going to look like more of a limitation or a boundary
Yeah.
around let's not do this for a time so that you can actually re-engage in exactly what you said, a healthy sexuality.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alex, I'm curious. I mean, that honestly probably is like just a good note to end on and stuff like that. But really, I think that because of our culture, I'm curious on if like your thoughts on if porn can ever be good for a person, or healthy for a person. And maybe that, coming off the cusp of what you just said, couches nicely in the fact of like what is healthy for a person. But
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, what are your thoughts?
Um, I think that's tough, right? Like, um, I don't know if because I want to come from a very clinical perspective on that, right? And research isn't like full on yes or no, right? It's very much on a there's a line that needs to be drawn with how much pornography is being used by an individual. And they're not sure if there is a healthy amount yet,
Mhm.
but they know that there is a line. Whereas, um, like, for instance, more than just a research says casual use, right? But what is that even defined as, right? And so, but someone who's engaging in pornography multiple times a week or a day, right? To me, when I'm talking with that person, they even see that as unhealthy for themselves, right? And they have that realization. And so pornography on that level it's not healthy for the individual, and male or female, right? And so I don't know if I can necessarily say yes, pornography is good or pornography is bad.
Yeah.
I think as a whole, um, what we know of how pornography is being used in our society today,
Mm-hmm.
probably bad,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, but we don't have all the answers.
Yeah, well, I hear your sensitivity, and obviously, like that makes a lot of sense to me, specifically in your clinical experience in working with people who come in to see you because it's unhealthy or bad in their life.
Yeah,
You know that's like why they seek you out. Um, so I would imagine, even from as a clinician standpoint, not even really seeing a ton of examples because the people who are seeking you out of it being good and healthy in someone's life.
right. They're already past that point usually of where it's unhealthy, right?
Yep.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe just my last question. This has been like kind of fun for me. I like talking about like taboo-ish things. But like maybe my last question is just like, what do you hope for people who really are struggling with basically treating porn like a substance, an addictive substance? Like, what would you hope for people who are at that place and are experiencing it as like a darkness in their life or a burden in their life or a shameful thing in their life? What would maybe you hope for them?
I think first and foremost, just to hope that they could have the strength and the courage to reach out for help, right? And knowing that you're not alone. Um, there's a lot of people who are just like you who are working through the same issues, right? And so reach out for help, right? I think our society is kind of slowly changing with those mental health stigmas, right? And like debunking some of those to where people are starting to feel more comfortable reaching out for help.
Mhm.
Um, but still, it takes a lot of courage. And so meeting with a client for the first time, that's one of the things I know I always voice to them is like, thank you for having the courage and the strength to come and do this, right? That takes a lot for a person, and just identifying that to them,
Mhm.
and validating that, because for some people, it might be one of the hardest decisions they've made, right? To reach out and get that help. So, yeah, first and foremost, I hope that they can have the courage to reach out and seek help if they really feel like this is such a burden on their life.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I hear you saying, like, don't do it alone, which
Yeah.
I love that in light of where we started around secrecy. That,
Hmm.
like, if you feel like this is a secret that is, um, feels like it's really inhibiting your life or not making you feel free, that your hope for them is that they would experience freedom partly in not having to do it alone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, like, there are actually a lot of ways for people to get help, which I think like people like yourself are a resource towards that, like to
Yeah.
actually see a mental health professional, which is like one thing. And then like other people go through different, intensities, or levels of care around it. But to know that it's like, yeah, one honestly like super safe way to do it is in therapy because there's confidentiality.
Yep.
You can't, and it is like just fully directed on how can we make you the wellest person, the most healthy person you can be.
Absolutely.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Alex, thanks so much for taking time.
Yeah.
Just like in between your clinical work and I just feel like it's a lot of fun to talk with you about this. And I get a different view than everybody else listening because in a way I kind of get to interact a little bit more closely in seeing you like directly impact people's lives for like
Mhm.
health. So it's just like a really like sweet thing for me to talk with you about this because
Yeah.
I know that it's like happening in real time in people's lives through like
Mhm.
your work at Optimum Joy. So I just really appreciate it and thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Thanks
I'll
for
see you in the
asking.
office soon.
Okay. Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Bye, Alex.
COVID. Bye.